All right, guys, welcome back. Today, we are going to get into it's going to get a little nerdy, but not, we're going to try and keep it lighthearted as much as we can. We're going to get into what the difference in each whiskey is. Not each whiskey, but, each style of whiskey. We're going to do a little bit of housekeeping beforehand, and then we'll jump right into it. All right. Housekeeping. Oh, man. What was I going to say? I don't remember. I had something very important to say, and it's gone. I've been out in the garden trying to get it ready. I know we're super late in the season, but, gets busy. The dreaded day job and, doing all this stuff. I wanted to thank everybody again. I know I said this on the last one. Thank everybody for their support and all the love they've been giving. They did release the Pardon My American show onto iTunes and all that. There's even a YouTube if you want to go watch it. You want to see my ugly mug, go ahead. They got kicked off of Spotify, so they're not on Spotify. But anyway, shadow banning is real. That's not what we're getting into. But I guess that's it. Man, I had something, and of course, as soon as I hit record, it's gone. Okay. What is the difference between the different styles of whiskey? Okay, so when we talked about what is whiskey, we kind of went over the different styles and stuff like that. We didn't go into great detail. We're still not going to go into super great detail. If that's something that you want, we can. Shoot me a DM, whatever, and we can go from there. But basically, I guess let's get stuck into it. We talked a lot about bourbon because being in America, bourbon is the thing. No, bourbon does not have to be made just in Kentucky. It can be made anywhere in the United States. The guidelines for it are, and this is strictly bourbon, so at least 51% of the mash bill, which is the amount of grain that goes into it to make the wash, has to be at least 51% corn. Any other adjunct you put into it, it doesn't matter at that point. You can have 51% corn and 49% wheat, barley, whatever, doesn't matter. And with bourbon, it has to be mashed, distilled, and then once it's distilled, it cannot be distilled any higher than 160 proof or 80% alcohol, or it's not considered bourbon whiskey. And it must be put into a new American white oak cask. It doesn't delineate the time that it has to be in there. We touched on that a little bit too. And then they have other things like it has to be in there a minimum of 2 years to be considered a straight bourbon whiskey. It has to be produced in the United States, obviously. 4 years under government supervision, obviously, but 99.9% of the distilleries out there are government supervised. They have to turn everything into the TTB and stuff like that. So 4 years, you can declare it bottled and bond as long as it's bottled at 100 proof or 50% alcohol. And it has to be through one distilling season by one head distiller. You can't have, one distiller quit halfway through the season or something like that. They used to do that a long time ago because they had when the grain was harvested, that was a season. And then in the spring and then the fall had to be in one of those seasons or whatever. But now with all the hybridized grains that we have, you can get it all year round. So that's really not a factor for it, but it has to be in the same year, distilled in the same, mashed and distilled in the same year. Most of the time they do that in the same week, so not a big deal. 4 years old though. And then you get into like rye whiskey, right? Rye whiskey is still whiskey. It's just its main grain in what we call the mash bill is 51% rye. Now it can be any sort of rye. It doesn't matter. Monongahela. It can be what is it? There's a oh crap, I forgot what it was called. Anyway, it can be any sort of rye. Now there is another category for rye malt, which would be 51% rye malt, which most distilleries don't use rye malt because it's difficult to work with. They use malted barley, but they won't use rye malt, and it does have a different flavor. There is some, and it should say malted rye on the bottle. One that's coming to my mind that I just saw recently was a distillery out of Nevada called Smoke Wagon, and they have a rye malt whiskey that they came out with. I think it's over 51% rye. I don't know the mash bill on it, and it doesn't matter. Anyway, and then it's the same with wheat. You get a wheat like a winter red or a soft white wheat. It has to be minimum 51% of that. A corn whiskey. Everybody knows what corn whiskey is. Everybody thinks of moonshine and stuff like that. You can delineate a corn whiskey if it's 80% corn. So you can have a corn whiskey that is a bourbon. But the difference with corn whiskey, most of the time they're put into used oak or uncharred oak. So it's like new oak, but it hasn't been charred, so you're not going to get all that deep, rich flavor and color. You're just going to get and it's almost, I hate to say it like this, the ones that I've tried, of course, I haven't tried every, whiskey in the world yet. Anyway, corn whiskey, like the ones that I've tried are kind of like sappy, almost like they're like dusty corn, obviously, but then they're like almost like a cut grass, real grassy, because the wood hasn't been charred or I don't know if it's even been toasted. Anyway, but there are some amazing corn whiskeys out there as well. They borderline bourbon. They're basically bourbons, but anyway. So then we get to what? Then there is what they call light whiskey. I know distilleries are doing a lot of this now. Light whiskey is basically whiskey distilled over 180, 160 proof. I'm sorry, 80% alcohol, up to 94.5%. It can't be 95% because that's vodka, right? So up to 94.5%, and then it's put into either new oak or used oak. It doesn't matter, and it's light whiskey. It has a lighter profile. Obviously, it's light. It strips out a lot of the flavor that's in the whiskey. And in one of the next episodes, we're going to talk about distillation and what it does and how it contributes. We'll probably team up distillation and like fermentation, because those two kind of go hand in hand. Yeast selection, stuff like that. Anyway, that one might be pretty nerdy, so just beware. So yeah, light whiskey. So if you want like something really, like if you're trying to get somebody new into whiskey, try a light whiskey. It's not going to burn them. It's going to be really light. It's going to be super vanilla for some reason. I don't know why they're super vanilla, but they are. And so a lot of times if you see a blended whiskey, it's normally a light whiskey or a grain whiskey that they mix with a bourbon. Why? Just to get different flavors. The one I can think of right now is TX blended. And to me, that whiskey, it's really good, but it's not really a bourbon. I think they might even mix it with vodka. I'm not 100% sure. I should have did a little research on that before I started opening my mouth. Anyway, the it tastes like melted vanilla ice cream. Like it's really good, but it's almost too sweet for me. Anyway, moving on. So then, what else is in America for whiskey? We got blended. We got that rye malt. Oh, and then there is, obviously in America, there's the American single malt too, which is 100% barley, malted barley. It doesn't matter what type, just as long as it's malted barley. And I'm guessing it's 51% minimum as well. But most people do 100%. They might have an adjunct grain of like some oats or maybe some oats or wheat in there to just give it a little different flavor profile, but most of the time it's 100% single malt, so that's kind of a strange one. I know that Jack Daniel's just released a malt whiskey, which was kind of strange. They're normally stuck on their Tennessee bourbon, and then you get into Tennessee whiskey. That was a good segue. I just made my own segue. That's pretty awesome. Tennessee whiskey has its own delineation from bourbon, in the fact that before they put it in a barrel, they run it, and this is Jack Daniel's. There's a couple other ones in Tennessee that do this as well. Dickel. I don't know if Pritchard's does it. Anyway, they put it through maple charcoal in this big vat. They take the distillate after it's done. They put it in this big vat and they pour it over this maple charcoal, and they just let it slowly filter through it, and then they put it in a barrel. Well, what it does is it lightens the profile of it and makes it, I hate this word, but it makes it smoother, right? It makes it less bitey, but it gives it a very definite profile. You try a Jack Daniel's, you'll know it every time. So that's it's kind of cool, but it's not really my flavor profile. I've tried a couple of Tennessee whiskeys and they're okay. If that's all I got, I'll drink it. But it's not like, one of those things. Okay, so we did Tennessee whiskey. Then there's different types of rye, like I said, and like Dad's Hat, for one, is known for using the Monongahela rye, and it is way different than the normal, like a bullet rye that you get. It is so different. It's like super like almost eucalyptusy and stuff like that. It's really cool. And Leopold Brothers out of Colorado, they're doing some really cool rye variations. And I could geek out about Leopold Brothers all day. They're doing some amazing stuff. But anyway, moving on. We got a long way to go and a short time to get there. So then we move out of the United States. Anything out of the United States, including Canada, cannot be bourbon. So if it says bourbon on it and it is from Mexico or Canada or Europe or wherever, it's not bourbon for sure. So we get into Canadian whiskey, and Canadian whiskey is so different. It really is. Not every Canadian distillery, but a lot of them, Crown Royal included, they will take the distillation of each grain separately. Okay, so they'll distill a corn mash, they'll distill a rye mash, they'll distill a wheat or whatever, all the mashes, and sometimes, most times, they will actually age them separately in separate barrels. So you have just corn, just rye, just barley, just, all these ones, and then they will blend them back together to fit their flavor profile. But that's not what the Crown Royal blended whiskey means. They also blend it with neutral grain spirit, which is vodka, which is colorless, tasteless, it's just an alcohol, and it gives it that kind of shiny, bright finish to it. Now, don't get me wrong, I used to drink a lot of Crown. I think that's everybody's go-to. Mix it with a little Coke. It's great. Super vanilla, but like it's almost like a fake vanilla. Like when you get that really bad vanilla extract, that's like, what is that? Yeah, it's kind of like that. And I've had some really nice Crown Royals, and they're okay. They're just not great. And they flavor a lot. They're allowed to put different colorings and additives and stuff like that and still call it whiskey. So, it's different in each country, and we're going to see that here in a minute. But the bad thing is, Canada has some really awesome whiskeys that they're making. Single malts and grain whiskeys, which they can't call it bourbons, right? So they're called grain whiskeys. So Crown Royal got into some trouble a couple of years ago. At this point, it's probably been 10. They released a whiskey, and it was called Bourbon Mash whiskey. And it was basically their representation of a bourbon, and they sold it in America. Well, guess what? They got sued for it because they can't legally do that, right? So they got sued for it. So now every bottle, I don't even know if they make it anymore. I haven't seen it in the store, but that doesn't mean anything. Every bottle has a thing, whiskey distilled from a bourbon mash bill. Right, so it's not bourbon, but it's made from what they would call a bourbon mash bill, which would be at least 51% corn, right? So, like, they got into a lot of trouble, and so, like, they had to put all these tags and stickers on everything, and it was a big ordeal. So they got, so it is a thing, and people are trying to uphold it. I think the laws around bourbon are kind of confining sometimes, because I don't know if I talked about this in the whiskey episode, what is whiskey episode, but it's getting harder and harder to find barrels, and they're behind on barrel making, and they're like kiln drying them, so to hurry up and dry them out instead of yard aging them to get that good flavor. And the cooperages that are making the barrels, they're trying to crank them out as fast as they can, and they can't keep up, And so if they just took the line in there that said had to be in new American white oak, if it would have just say in an oak cask, any oak cask, it would make a lot of, differences. Because I've had some whiskeys distilled from a bourbon mash that were put into a already used barrel, and they were so good. They were a lot lighter. Obviously, you're not going to get those deep, dark colors and tastes out of it, and the smells, but you're going to get some really nice, interesting flavors out of it. So yeah. And then obviously there's finishing, which finishing borderlines that, but not really. It turns into what in the industry they call it a distilled spirit specialty. So it's a bourbon, and it'll say finished, right? They can get away with that because it was a bourbon at one time. But then when they put it in another cask, like a wine cask or something, it's no longer a bourbon, right? Has to be in there its whole life. So, like, I'm thinking of one, Angel's Envy, right? They do a port wine finished. That's all their bourbon is port wine finished. And they have a rye that's rum finished, right? It's whiskey, but it's not bourbon anymore. Now, that's crossing hairs right there. That's not, to me, I don't care. If it tastes good, it tastes good. It's whiskey, right? But, to the TTB and stuff like that, they're very particular about that. So finishing is really cool. There's some people doing some really cool stuff with cognac casks and all that stuff, and it makes some amazing stuff. I'm actually trying to set up a tasting where we're only drinking finished whiskeys. I have one that was finished in Armagnac casks. I've got one that were finished in absinthe barrel. super cool. Like they're gonna be really nice. Anyway, moving on. Let's get out of North America. Now, Mexico does have some whiskeys, a lot of corn whiskeys, right? They're they don't really have any sort of rules other than it needs to be made from corn. But there's no saying, like, the laws in a lot of places are really sketchy. Like, are they putting sugar in there? Are they putting, whatever? Because when you start putting all these extra additives, like maple syrup or whatever, it's not really whiskey. You're making more of like a rum or a moonshine or whatever. So the whiskey is there for that reason. The delineation of whiskey needs to be made from grain and grain only. So South America, there's not really a whole lot. They make a lot of mezcal and stuff like that, but there is some whiskey being made down there, but not a whole lot, because I haven't heard of it. I'm sure there's some, but not a whole lot. So then we get to like Africa. You really don't have a whole lot either. Maybe in South Africa, but not that I've heard of. Then you get to Europe. There's French whiskeys, Spanish whiskeys, and they all have to follow that same guideline. Now, most of them are not making bourbon. Most of them are making single malt or a blended malt. And so I've tried a couple, and they're pretty good, depending, And then you get to, obviously, Ireland and Scotland, Japan. Russia's not really known for making whiskey. They're more of a vodka people. And if they did make whiskey, it would probably be like a wheat-based whiskey or something like that. And then, there's like Polish whiskeys and stuff like that, but they're not real prominent. You can get them, but they're not real prominent. So in Ireland and pretty much Scotland as well, there is a delineation between Irish whiskey and Scottish whiskey. So let's go with Irish first. Irish whiskey obviously has to be made in Ireland, right? And they say it needs to be aged in oak casks. No, wood. I think it just says wood cask. So it's like, it doesn't even have to be oak, because there's Methods of Madness, right? Which is a Middleton distillery, and they're doing all kinds of crazy stuff with these different barrels, like chestnut and maple, and like all these really cool different barrels, which is so awesome. That's what we all need to do. Try different things and see how it works. If it's good, it's good. If it's not, oh well, scrap it, start over, whatever. The bad thing is it costs a lot of money, and if it sucks, then you got 53 gallons of whiskey that you can't do anything with because it tastes like crap. Anyway, but I think I told you all last time, in Ireland, to get around the tax, they, in their single pot still whiskey, they were using unmalted barley, right? And then malted barley, and it gave it a really weird, not weird, it's not weird at all, give it a really buttery, biscuity type flavor. Super amazing. Redbreast, trying to think of what else. Powers, John Lane edition. I don't know if that's single pot or not. Anyway, I'm talking. I know that Teeling has one. Anyway, they're doing some really cool stuff with that. And then then you get into Jameson, right? Everybody knows Jameson. It's a blended whiskey as well. So they blend the regular single malt with a grain whiskey, and you can kind of tell. But they're doing a lot of Jameson does have single malts that they're doing and stuff as well, but they get pretty pricey and stuff like that. So most people don't go for them. They go for the regular one and just So Ireland, you're there, and in order for it to be Irish whiskey, it has to be made from grain, and it has to be aged in casks and wood casks, and it has to be a minimum of 3 years old to be considered whiskey. Anything other than that is just distilled spirit specialty, right? And I think that's pretty much worldwide. I'm not 100% sure, but don't quote me on that. So yeah, so like the profile of Irish whiskey is really light and fruity and kind of floral sometimes. It's not going to knock your socks off, but it's not a backseat, whiskey either. You can get some that have some really good, strong flavors as well, especially if you get that single pot still. So then we move into what was I saying? My door flew open. Then we move into Scotch. So Scotch had different regions, and those different regions of Scotland, they produce different whiskeys. The flavors are very different. When you get along the coastline, you're going to get a little saltier, brinier stuff. Not peated, but it will taste a little like you get to what they call the island whiskeys, and you're going to notice a difference. 99% of those are, well, not 99. I'd say 80% of those are single malt, barley only, and then the other 20% is grain whiskey. And then they do a delineation between blending single grain, blending single malts, and then blended Scotch. We talked about that. So like you get to Macallan, right? Everybody knows Macallan. You get there, that's going to be, the Speyside region. And then there's, a bunch of different other regions around it. And then you get up to, like you have Campbelltown, which is like Springbank, and it's a peated whiskey most of the time, but it's not like Islay. Islay whiskey is going to be a totally different type of peat, just because of the lay of the land, right? And then you get Islay, of course, and they're creating some really cool things. And then you get into Island, like Orkney Islands, Highland Park, stuff like that. I mean, they're just making some amazing whiskeys. And then there's a bunch of blending houses, which they basically take the whiskey and they blend it, and they do all that. And I think we talked about that. So like Monkey Shoulder, it's a blended Scotch, and you can you can pick up all these different, like, let's take Johnny Walker for instance. Johnny Walker, they take from different distilleries around Scotland, and they take this product, a lot of Cardew. If you've ever heard of Cardew, it's a really, really nice whiskey, but they sell 90% of their stuff to Johnny Walker for pretty much all of their blends. And then they'll get a little bit of Kulila, which is Islay. You'll get a little bit of that, and then we'll do this, and they'll just kind of mix them all together and find the different flavor profiles that they want. Not all are peated, obviously, but it's really pretty cool the way they do it. And their whiskeys, of course, have to be minimum 3 years old to be considered Scotch. So then we could talk about Scotch all day long, but we don't have the time, really. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I can't divulge all my secrets at first. Like, good Lord, what am I doing here? I paid a lot of money and went through a lot of time for this, and you guys are getting it for free. What the hell? Anyway, but so then we go out of Europe, right? And then we go to there's some Indian and Korean, Taiwanese whiskeys. They're really nice and cool and different. Mostly single malt. I guess barley must be really easy to grow. I don't know, because I guess everybody's growing it. Sorry, I had to get a little drinky. So then we go to Japan, and in Japan, I think we touched on this a little bit. Um, Japan was kind of new to whiskey for a long time, and then they have been, like, lately, the past 10 years or so, maybe 15, have kind of blown up. Suntory, they're making some really amazing stuff. Nika, they're making some cool stuff. But the issue with them is a lot of the distilleries they're kind of getting the cash cow, and they are taking, like, Scotch whiskey and dumping it out of the cask, slapping a label on it, and calling it Japanese whiskey. They put some, samurai on it and some Japanese writing, and they say it's whiskey. Well, they don't have to. Their government doesn't make them put where it was sourced from on the back, or somewhere, So you're kind of stuck to your own discretion. Now, some of them are good. I've tried them. I thought it was, Japanese. I was at the liquor store, saw this, and I was like, hey, I'll pick that up or whatever. And then I'm doing more research when I get home, and I'm like, oh, crap, they just source Scotch, which is fine, right? But just be transparent about it. It's kind of sucks when you're spending the money on the bottle and it's not even what you wanted, because the flavor profile of Japanese is almost lighter than Scotch, than Irish. It's super. I don't know how to really tell you. It's like, okay, here's what it is. You take, like, if you've ever seen honeysuckles, right? And you take the little stem out of the honeysuckle and you put it in your mouth, and you get that, like, sweet floral taste with a little bitter tinge. Add a couple drops of alcohol on that, because most of them are between 40 and 43% alcohol, so they're not super ethanol forward. So yeah, I mean, it's super light, super fresh, crisp, stuff like that. So it's not. I really recommend finding a good Japanese whiskey and trying it out for yourself, because it can be super good. If you need any recommendations, shoot me a DM. I'll help you out. But yeah, I mean, so everybody thinks that, this new Japanese craze is gonna flood the market, and everybody. The issue is, like, the good Japanese whiskeys, like the Hakushu and the Yamasaki and stuff like that, those are well over $100 a bottle. And most people, now, not saying everybody, most people are not going to spend that much for a whiskey. Most people that I know, they spend anywhere between 30 to 50 maybe on a bottle. So you have to understand that price point as well. Like, in America, it's so cheap to buy bourbon, right? You can buy bourbon for $10, right? Scotch, one of the cheapest scotches I can get is like $25, $30 for the cheap stuff. It's just, the cost of doing business in America, when you have to ship the stuff. Now, I guess if you were in Scotland, it would be cheaper to buy Scotch, and that's the thing. Like, my buddy who lives in New Zealand, he's like, I can eat more easily and affordably, is that a word? Anyway, buy Scotch in New Zealand than I can bourbon, because the tariff on the bourbon is a lot higher. So a bottle of Jim Beam, whatever, is like double the price that it should be in America. So it makes it kind of crappy that, I mean, if you're into scotches, that's fine. But if you're trying to open your flavor profile for bourbon and you don't live in America, it kind of sucks. It's the same with Canada. Canada, they have a a pretty large tariff on some of their stuff, and it's like, you know, sorry. So a lot of them come down here and pick it up, but then you have to pay, the fees to get it back. So it's kind of crappy. International shipping is an issue, obviously, with all of this. But yeah, no, I mean, just, I think if the consumer themselves were a little more educated, and I guess that's part of what this podcast is. You know what I mean? Like, kind of like a PSA for you to be like, to watch out for this. Don't, don't fall for this. Because my main goal is to help people understand whiskey and to enjoy it, right? But again, I want you to, what you're going to spend your money on, I want you to know what you're getting. And in the near future, we're going to do a deep dive on a bottle, and we're going to go through it, and I'm going to tell you my true feelings on it. And we're going to sit down and we're going to, detail it, and I'm going to tell you how much I paid for it, and then if you should get it or not. Now, obviously, taste is subjective and all of this stuff, so it's not, it's not going to be the end-all, be-all, but at the same time, I want the people listening to be like, hey, he said this was good. I don't know why, but I value what he says. I don't know, whatever. But, I just want an informed consumer out there, basically, because there's a lot of shady people doing shady stuff. I was listening to another podcast, that's why I created one, because I listen to them all the time. I was listening to another podcast, and they were saying that the secondary market for buying bourbons and whiskeys and stuff like that is overrun with counterfeits. They go on eBay and they buy this bottle that was the old bottle of Pappy 23 or whatever. They buy this and then they fill it with some cheap Jim Beam or something like that and put a vac seal thing on it and sell it on the secondary market for thousands of dollars. And the bad thing is the consumer, they don't drink it. They're not going to drink the Pappy 23. You know what I mean? They might, but like most of them are buying to resell. Which to me, I'm like, well, I understand it. Because there are people out there that are like, I want this bottle. I have some of those that I want, but I'm not willing to pay what these people are paying for these bottles. I'm sorry, I'm not going to. This might have gone into a rant. I'm sorry. We were talking about what's the difference between the different whiskeys, and now I'm off to this land. But anyway, so it's really difficult for you to know what you're getting in the bottle as well. That's why getting it from, unfortunately, as much as I hate the 3-tier system, getting it from there is going to be one of your best options, unless you get it directly from the distillery, and most people aren't going to go to every distillery, that they... Now, don't get me wrong, doing a bourbon trail and getting bottles, getting bottles there, that's one thing. But most of the time, if you're doing that, you're getting single barrels or one-offs or something like that. You're not getting your Wild Turkey 101 when you go to the distillery. You know what I mean? You can get that anywhere. But that's the thing. Like, people need to be aware that there's this stuff out there and watch the secondary markets and stuff like that, because you don't know what you're getting. And if you don't know what the difference is, then you're just going to get duped, and you're going to be like, well, crap, I spent $800 for this bottle of whiskey and it's crap in there, so just be weary of that. And if you like everybody says, if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. So just be aware of that. All right, so what is the difference in all of these whiskeys? There's a lot, actually. A lot is different. But at the same time, they're still whiskeys. And unfortunately, for most of us, we will try and 1/8 of the amount of whiskey that is out there in the world. So that's why there's people like myself and 10 million other people that are making content for people. That's why it's, I hope that somebody says, hey, I have that same flavor profile. I like the way this tastes. And that's why when I do like tastings and stuff, if you like this, you might also like this, kind of like Netflix. If you if you like this show, you might like this show as well, because I know you might not be able to get some of the bottles I get, because I can't get some of the bottles that some other people get. Like, it is so hard for me to find basic bottles. And we can talk about all the allocation and stuff like that as well, but anyway, that's not what we're here for today. But so all the different whiskeys are very different. You get a rye whiskey, put it up against a bourbon whiskey, it's going to taste different. You get a Scotch and put it up against an Irish, it's going to taste different. And you have to think that the distilleries that put their hands on that whiskey, the time and effort they put into it, it's kind of a big deal, and I think that's another thing that people don't realize is they don't, how do I say it? They don't respect the whiskey. Obviously they overindulge and shit like that, but that's not what I'm saying. Like, you have to understand that somebody, that bottle of whiskey has probably been in 20 different people's hands. You know what I mean? So, damn, that's a big deal. Like, they've checked it, they've double checked it, they've mashed it, they've distilled it, they've bottled, they aged it, they've checked it while it was aging, they've tweaked it, they've proofed it down, they've had to do so many steps to get that, and we take that for granted a lot of times. So the difference is our perception of it is different, and it needs to be different. If you're a college kid shooting whiskey, there ain't nothing wrong with that. Do what you gotta do. I don't care. I don't condone it, obviously, because I like to enjoy it, but at the same time, that's not what it's really for, but yeah, I mean, it gets pretty crazy. So I hope that kind of clarified some of it, some of the differences between the whiskeys. It might have been a ramble fest, and I apologize. If it was, let me know. But okay, we're getting towards the end, and I wanted to tell y'all again, thank you for all the support. Thank you for the love. I'm going to keep doing this. I don't care if one person listens, if a million people listen, I'm going to do it the same. We will start having guests real soon. Not real soon, but you know what I mean. We're going to have guests. We're going to, when I'm recording this next weekend is the Texas Whiskey Festival, and I will be there. I will be hopefully doing some live video and stuff like that. And then when I get back, we'll talk about that, how awesome that was, because I know it's going to be awesome. But if you guys want to get in contact with me, I think you already know how. But you can go to Instagram, Facebook. I'm on YouTube. They post stupid shorts on there. I'm trying to get into not posting just shorts, but anyway, at _, Whiskey Shaman. Somebody stole Whiskey Shaman. I don't know why. They don't use the the profile. Anyway, I've talked to them about buying it from them, but at this point I'm _. So, and if you are in the Texas Hill Country and you would like to book a tasting of some of these whiskeys that we've talked about, You can go to whiskeybusinessfbg.com and book a tasting. They're super fun. Get like 5 whiskeys, and we just BS and either go nerdy about it or just drink some cool whiskey and talk. And it can be whatever you want. Well, not whatever you want, whatever I have available. Because I do it from my store, so you kind of get what you get. So that's why when I post on Instagram, I'm like, if you want this bottle, this particular bottle that I'm, reviewing, if you want this one, you better hurry up because it might be gone. I do have some reserve, but very little. I can't have that much. My wife would kill me. And so I just appreciate everybody and thank you all for listening. And I will see you next time. And as always, keep your spirits up.